Thank you for joining us today. It's Beginner Beekeeping Q&A. This time of the month we like to answer any beginner beekeeping questions, just providing an environment where you can feel comfortable just asking any questions you like about beekeeping, because we all started off as new beekeepers once. If you've got answers to other people's questions, chime in. It's wonderful to see people from all over the world chiming in on people's beginner questions to help them get started in the amazing pursuit of beekeeping. So this is our flow hive, and if you're new to that, in the top it's got my father and I's invention, the flow frames, and in the bottom is pretty much a conventional beehive, the way it's been for hundreds of years, with bees doing their thing on wood and wax frames. The queen's laying her eggs, there's honey stores, there's pollen stores, there's everything that a beehive needs. And then in the window here, you can see the bees on the flow frame surface. They've covered it all in wax. They're waiting for some more nectar. Now, we've harvested this frame about 2 weeks ago, and you can see they've ripped off all of the capping, they've recycled the wax, and now they're starting to deposit nectar again. I can see here there's one last frame to go. There is a nectar flow coming in, so we're going to harvest this last frame just to show you how it all works. And while we're doing that, we'll answer your questions, so put them in the comments. Don't be shy. Ask anything you like about beekeeping, flow frames, flow hives, and we'll help you get started. So I've just pulled a couple of little caps out. We put the tube in here. I want to show you how easy it is to harvest. The key goes in the bottom slot up there, and then you turn it, and you can see a little example of what's happening throughout the frame here, because the honey's now falling down in zigzagging channels that are made when the flow frame parts move. That's happening all throughout the frame, so I can just put the key all the way in there, turn it, and pretty soon you'll see the honey flowing down the tube and into your jar. Look at that. Beautiful. So if you've got questions, put it in the comments and we'll answer those while we're harvesting this amazing honey. I'm actually going to taste it because I can't help it. I do love honey. Yum. I thought it would be the paper bark, but it's not quite yet. The paper bark is starting to flower down here. The indigenous folks here called it the rain tree, because when the rains come, it bursts into flower for several days and then it wilts away again. The rains come, it bursts into flower, so you get these nectar pulses from the paper bark. And lately it's just been a really rich smell that's been wafting through the office here where we all work, and it's almost like an overpowering sweet smell, which is just incredible. Look at that, beautiful honey, straight out of the hive, ready for the table. These long jars are fun because you just get to see just how much honey comes from a single frame. So you could harvest 7 of these if the bees, or when the bees fill up all of the frames. Any questions, Trace?
Yeah, Cedar, couple coming in from Insta. Not sure where this person is, Rochelle. Just wondering when to add the flow frame box, the super box.
Okay, great question. We really do advise waiting till the bees have filled up the bottom box first. So down here you've got your wooden frames. The bees are building their natural wax. They're hanging it. Make sure they are using each frame. They've drawn out all of their wax in all of the frames. And once they've done that and there's lots of bees in there, it's time to add the top box, the Flow Super. Now, if you add it early in a warm climate, that's no issue. Just wait and some patience before they will start to use it. But if it's a cold climate, what you're doing is giving them extra space that they don't need, so it's just a bit harder for them to keep themselves warm in the cold. So for that reason, we recommend adding it once the bottom box is full with bees and they're using all of the frames. And that way you won't be getting some impatient as well, waiting for the bees to start on your flow frames.
Right. So how do you get the bees to go in?
Into the box?
Yeah, into the box.
Okay, let's just have a look around the front here and see. The sun's just come out and we're going to make Callum get up here and view the entrance. So you can see there the bees go in and out the entrance there. So we installed the bees in this hive from another beehive. So we took some frames out of another one, and those frames had eggs on them, and they were able to raise a queen from that, and that's called a split. So that's one way to get started in beekeeping, is you take some frames out of the bottom box of another hive, put it into your bottom box here, look after them, and they'll grow. And when they're ready, when they've built up in numbers and that coincides with a great nectar flow, then you get this beautiful experience of being able to harvest the honey if you're using a flow hive in this easy, gentle way. And it's kind of mesmerizing, really. I still just kind of can't believe it works so well, in a way.
Hey, Steve, you were just talking about that jar, and a couple of people saying, what size is that jar?
That's a 2-litre jar, so this is your typical pasta jar. And if you're using this size, then the bottom of it's actually right down here. So you'll be hooking your shelf brackets on right down low. Or if you've got the classic hive, then you probably have this on the ground below the base, and you probably need the base up on a couple of bricks in order to get the length of this. There are other jars that'll fit up a bit higher, and then of course you can harvest from small into small jars if you just want to skip the bottling up stage and you just want to fill a bunch of small jars, give them away to your neighbours, sell them at your roadside stall. Or tiny jars that are even smaller is a fun thing to do for a wedding or something like that. We have taken a few hives to weddings before, and everybody's taken home a small little jar of honey from that beautiful ceremony, which is a fun thing to do. So you got options basically. Yum. Love the honey.
Oh, Mike's tuning in from Melbourne, King Lake. He's got a flow hive system that's going gangbusters, going really well. Just wondering, he wants to put a non-flow hive, so he's going to get a traditional hive and then eventually add another flow hive system to it. His question is, do they need to stay apart, or can I just put them next to each other?
You can put them right next to each other. Now, beekeepers in a conventional sense will often put them wall to wall, say on a pallet. They put 4 hives jammed together on a pallet. Bees are clever enough to know which hive's theirs. If you get a bit of drift between one and the other, that's pretty normal in beehives anyway, if they're closer than 10 metres. Basically, if you put them 10 metres apart or more, you'll probably get hardly any drift of bees from one to the other, which does limit pathogen spread, but you can put them as close as you like and your bees will be fine. So the only thing I would suggest doing is leaving enough room for you to look at these windows and service your hives. So the spacing we've got here is quite nice because we can stand up there and work the hive, look in the windows, and it works quite well. If you put them too close, then the roofs are banging into each other and you can't actually get to the side window.
Great. Sarah's looking to start a hive in Brisbane, so just a couple of hours north of here. Just wondering, as we're about to go into winter, is she better off waiting till spring, or could she start a hive now?
Probably get flowers all winter, and you can just about start any time. What I'd recommend doing is getting your equipment, get it all ready, so you've put your finish on the outside after you've assembled it, and meanwhile order some bees from a beekeeper. The easiest way to get started is what's called a nucleus, where you go to a bee breeder and say, can I order a nucleus, and it's a going little mini hive. You situate that where you want to put your hive, then you get in your bee suit, get out your smoker, and on a nice warm sunny day, which could be several weeks down the track, you can then transfer them into your bottom box, look after them, and they'll grow from there. Now, where we are here, we get a good honey flow through the winter time, so we can often even do splits in the later part of winter. So it really does depend where you are. You're a bit further north from us. Again, the winters are very, very mild, so it really depends what forage is around exactly in your area. If you're a bit more inland, then it might not be till spring that the bees really get on their feet and start storing nectar. The difference in a couple of hours drive is really different depending on what forage is around. So asking your local beekeepers will give you a good idea of the season there as well. So long answer, around here, if you're towards the coast, you can start just about any time of year. You can take a split from somebody's beehive or order a nucleus from a beekeeper.
Great. So what's the best way to go about getting your bees and a queen?
So there's a few different ways. We were just covering a nucleus, which is probably the easiest way. It's a going little mini hive. You can go and pick up that from a bee breeder, take that to your place, transfer those frames, which are basically your wooden brood frames down here, to your brood box, put in the rest of your brood frames, look after them, and they'll grow from there. You can also order a package, which is a queen in a little queen cage, and just a whole bunch of bees. It's a bit like an artificial swarm where a beekeeper has shaken the bees off the frames and put them right into a little box for you, and you can order them in the mail. They'll land on your doorstep. You get some odd looks from your delivery service, and it'll be buzzing quite a lot. If you do order a package, you need to put them into your brood box straight away by just basically tipping them in, putting the queen in her little cage. When the candy block in the queen cage gets chewed away, she'll be released into the hive. The bees will go crazy, building comb as quick as they can, and away your hive goes from there. Another great way is doing a split, like we were talking earlier, where you take frames out of another hive and move them into your hive. If there's bee eggs in the bottom of the cells, they'll likely raise a queen from that egg by feeding it royal jelly for its entire larval stage, and then you'll have a queen and your hive will get going from that. So you can also catch swarms in the springtime. That's more adventurous. We've got plenty of videos showing you how to do all of these methods. You can have a look at thebeekeeper.org if you want a handhold and training that takes you from square one right through to even a deep scientific knowledge in beekeeping. Gets rave reviews and is also an amazing fundraiser where we've planted 1.5 million trees so far in high quality ecosystems around the world. The idea that we need to put habitat back to support not only our European honeybees but our native bees, all of the pollinators and everything that needs habitat. So have a look at thebeekeeper.org if you want a great online training course, or you can ask me each week here, or we've got a wealth of knowledge on our YouTube channel and our Facebook page as well.
So Anna's asking, what method do you prefer to check for varroa? They find it very hard to do the alcohol bath wash with all the bees.
So we have been doing that. It's been necessary here. It's part of our compliance to do the alcohol washes. And there's also the sugar shake, which you can do as well. I guess it's a learning curve for us here about varroa. So if you really know a lot about varroa, chime in and help as to what you do in order to count the varroa mites. People do use sticky boards as well, so they might be counting mite drop. Some people just count mite drop naturally, where they'll just turn the tray underneath upside down, and if mites fall onto it, then that's one way of counting. Others will use what's called a sticky board, so they might cover it in vegetable shortening, just a piece of cardboard, and then any live mites that fall through will actually get stuck onto that. So this is all when the mites are very advanced. We haven't found any around here yet, but it is loose in Australia and will slowly spread, unfortunately. So we do have some training on varroa at thebeekeeper.org, and every other continent has varroa mites and we can learn from them. So if you've got good methods of dealing with varroa mites, counting varroa mites, then chime in. It's all about learning.
Great. So Yelena's wanting to know, she's got a very small backyard and just wondering, how big a yard do you need to have a beehive in?
One of the amazing things about beekeeping is it takes up a very small amount of space. this is it. The bees do their thing, and you can harvest honey right here. So that's very different to the conventional beehive, where you had to have a processing shed set up with an extracting room, with your centrifugal spinner, with your hot knife, your decapping bench, your buckets and sieves and so on. Now you don't need that anymore with our flow hive invention. You can harvest directly from the hive to your jar, and this could be on your balcony in the city, on the rooftop, or in your urban backyard. So it is a wonderful way you can do a bit of farming with a very small footprint, which is just 1 metre by 1 metre.
Fantastic.
We're getting a little bit of rain here.
Yeah.
We might get rained out. So one thing you can do is harvest honey in the rain with a flow hive. Conventionally you wouldn't do that. The bees would get really upset with you. They've hardly noticed that we're harvesting any honey. So what I'm going to do is cover up that so rain doesn't get actually in the jar. And we can do that just with a bit of kitchen wrap, or what I've got here is a piece of wax wrap, the kind you'd use for your children's lunch boxes. That's a recyclable wax and cloth wrap. And I'm just going to put it over the top of the jar, pinch it around under the tube, so if bees get hungry they won't get in, and then around the top of the jar. And that'll also keep the rain out as we get the last bits of honey out of that frame. Isn't that amazing? That's a big jar of honey in the small amount of time we've been talking, and that's just a single frame from this hive. So we'll come back to this, but for now what we'll do is catch a bit of shelter and keep answering your questions. So if you've got more questions, then just chime in and we'll keep answering them.
Great, Cedar. April, this is a good one, wants to purchase a flow hive, and just wondering, does it come with any beekeeping startup tips when you purchase your flow hive?
So we do send you emails with various links to make sure you have as much information as you can. And they'll send you through to our YouTube channel, which has a lot of tips and tricks and all of these videos of us answering questions live. And it also will send you links to our Facebook page, and also if you do want a sequential online training course that gets rave reviews, have a look at the beekeeper.org. We'll also send you links to that. So the idea is we are here to answer your questions, and we'll also be here each week like this answering questions if you need to chime in. So hopefully all your questions are answered and you're able to get a nice smooth start in beekeeping.
Fantastic. Another question, actually, Michael's tuning in from Western Australia in Bunbury, and a bit of a similar question to our caller before from Brisbane. Just wondering, it's getting cold down over there at the moment, and just wondering, should they wait for a warmer season to build up or put out for another hive?
Okay, so what was the location again, Trace?
They're in Bunbury, Western Australia. I don't think that's South Western Australia.
Yeah, okay. So good idea to ask your local beekeepers. It can be a bit of a microclimate depending exactly where you are. Pretty much unanimously, springtime is the most bumper time in beekeeping for nectar. So a lot of flowers flower and you've got a lot of nectar. If the bees are nice and strong, they'll really bring that in. You can get exciting times where they'll be really building up fast because the nectar stimulates the queen to lay more eggs, and there's plenty of food available, so the colony expands. They start storing an incredible amount of honey. So that is the sort of fast time to get going. However, it does depend on how you want to start. For instance, if you just want to purchase somebody else's conventional Langstroth hive, you can get that any time of year, put it in place, swap them into your flow hive whenever you want to. So that can be one way to start any time of year. In terms of taking splits, it's generally springtime. Here, the last month of winter, and sometimes during winter we can take our splits as well. Other places where you've got a lot of cold weather, potentially snow and everything, you certainly wouldn't be taking splits in winter. You would be waiting to the springtime. So it really depends on your local climate there and whether you can get hold of bees. Now, I think it's good to get ahead of the curve, get your equipment ready so that when you have the opportunity to get some bees, you're ready to go and put them in.
Great seeds. Our flow hives come with foundationless brood frames,
Yep.
and John's saying he got a nuke and he was expecting the same, but of course they've actually got foundation on them. So just wondering, can he mix the two together?
Absolutely. So there's no problem mixing wax foundation with foundationless frames or plastic foundation. Doesn't really matter. The bees will do their thing either way. I've found in preference, if you give bees options, blank space, they'll fill first as a preference, followed by wax foundation, followed by plastic foundation. So I think just leaving it perfectly natural for the bees is a great way to go. Less work waxing and wiring those frames. However, a lot of beekeepers, and it's really become conventional to put the wax foundation in. I used to do a lot of that because that's all I knew, and I would spend a lot of time wiring or waxing the frames in the night time, and I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore because we don't need to put those frames into a centrifuge. We don't need the wire reinforcement or the plastic reinforcement in there. We can just let the bees draw the comb themselves, knowing that those frames aren't going to be spun around at high speed in a centrifuge, and the bees will store their honey in the flow frames. So they only get used for brood for us, so we're happy just to let them draw themselves with no wax, with no wire or plastic in the frames for reinforcement. So a bit of a change there, makes it easier I think and more fun. Sometimes they'll go sideways, but it's not too hard to correct that, and it saves all of that waxing and wiring and going and buying wax foundation and so on. But mix it up. My dad likes to put maybe 1 or 2 wax foundation frames in just to get them started straight. I like to go all naturally drawn, even if I shake a swarm in, and they usually go straight on the comb guides and away they go.
That is it. So the Carmen's wondering, do you need to remove the queen excluder during the winter months so she can also access the honey stores in the super?
If you're in a cold climate, yes, removing the queen excluder is a good idea, because what happens is the bees go into a hibernation mode. Let's say you've got a long cold winter with snow ahead, the bees will bunker down into a ball and just keep warm. They disconnect their wing muscles and they vibrate to create warmth, and that's how they survive. And they need to consume honey in order to fuel themselves, to keep vibrating and being heater bees. But as the honey is consumed in the bottom box, they'll then move up higher to consume more honey, and if you've got an excluder in the way, the queen will be left behind and potentially perish in the cold. So if you want to start the spring with your queen, then take that excluder out in those cold climates, and that way the whole bee ball and the queen can move up and consume honey as that long winter progresses. Here we don't really get a winter. We're in a subtropical region. We can leave the excluder in all year round.
So this is a good one. Can bees tell if you're nervous or not? Abby's saying that they find themselves incredibly nervous when they have to go into the beehive, so they're wondering if the bees can pick it up.
A lot of people do say that bees will really pick up on whether you're nervous or not, and it kind of forces you to be calmer. In reality, I think the genetics of the hive plays a much bigger role in whether there's aggression or not from your hive. So if you've got a really aggressive hive, like they just have aggressive genetics, whether you're the calmest beekeeper in the world, they're going to sting you if you start pulling your hive apart. And so yes, calm movements and being calm does help, but the genetics of the hive play a much bigger role in the aggression there. So I wouldn't be too worried about feeling nervous. Just protect yourself well, which will help calm you. Use a lot of smoke in the hive entrance. Make sure you're putting the nozzle of the smoker right in the entrance with 3 good puffs. Wait a couple of minutes and that'll calm down the hive. And wear your gloves, and if you're well protected, you've smoked the hive well, then the bees are likely to be more calm and easier to work with, and that'll be just a more gentle and nice experience for the bees and you.
How often do you do your hive checks? Is a good question coming in. Weekly, monthly? What's best? And I guess depending on the season, maybe.
Yeah, so that's changing a little bit here, where we've now got the varroa mite in our continent, and we're still learning about what we'll need to do to manage that. We don't have it in our area yet. Previously, we'd been in the golden age in a way, where often bees will be fine for a very long time with very little intervention, apart from a bit of monitoring. So commercial beekeepers around here typically would go through every brood frame a couple of times a year, just checking for pests and disease. So that's 2 really thorough brood checks a year, and then as it happens, kind of brood checks where they notice that one hive is performing as well as others. So they'll get in there, have a look, and they might find the queen's failing, or perhaps she's died and the hive's queenless, and so on. So there's an as it happens brood checks, and then there's the basically thorough checks to make sure you don't have things like AFB or EFB in your hives. When it comes to varroa mite, it does depend on your management strategy. There are more involved management strategies where you're doing drone uncapping, perhaps you're taking a frame of drones away from the hive and freezing them, putting them back as varroa control, and that will mean you're doing brood inspections more often. However, even with the varroa mite, they're a very low maintenance piece of farming, I think. It's not like you have to put your chickens away every night or chase your goats around the field. They do their thing, and you'll monitor them and do regular maintenance as is required in your area. So ask your local beekeepers how often they get into their brood nest, and that'll give you a great idea of what to expect in your area.
Seda, are there flowers that are better to be planted around your beehive, or are they attracted to certain flowers or trees than other plants?
So we like to plant flowers around our hives, not so much to increase the honey crop, but actually to attract the native bees. It's a beautiful thing to watch the native and solitary bees coming and foraging. We had a teddy bear bee and a blue banded bee foraging on the same flower right at the flow hive we were just harvesting the other day. It's so cool to see, and it's an education piece for us really, knowing that Apis mellifera, the European honeybee, is only one of almost 20,000 bee species in the world, and we need to look after them all. Pollination makes the world go round, and it's a really important piece. And of course, looking after our habitat for our European honeybees also helps other species as well. So we plant flowers for that, for the native bee reason and for the education reason really. You don't have to plant flowers, you can just put your beehive out. They'll be foraging on a up to 6 mile, 10 kilometre radius and bringing that nectar back into your hive, so it's unlikely to change your honey crop unless you're planting out several acres of forage for your bees.
Right. See, this is a good one in terms of at the moment when we're shipping our flow hives to the US, we're splitting some orders, and some people are getting their hive boxes so they can get started, and then their flow frames are going to arrive later. So one of the questions in here today is that, okay, so my hives arrived but my flow frames haven't. Can I still put my bees in, and how long before I would add my flow frames?
Okay, great. So you're generally not adding flow frames till your bees are well established. They've drawn out all the wax frames in the bottom box. There's lots of bees in there, so it might be months down the track before you're adding flow frames to your hive. So as long as you've got a box to put the colony in, then away you go. So another one is if you've ordered a nucleus hive, you don't need to have a hive box for some time. They could stay in that little nuke box for weeks or even a month or so, as long as you've got some shade over the top, and that way when you have all your equipment ready you can transfer them in to your flow hive bottom box and away you go. If you're ordered a package, then you'll need to assemble your brood box, your base, and your roof, and that way you can shake that package of bees into the bottom box, insert the wooden frames and look after them, and they'll grow from there. So if your flow frames haven't arrived, don't worry, they will arrive in time for your bees to use them.
Great, thanks Cedar, and I think the customer support team will love that, because that's a lot of questions that we're coming in at the moment from the US, from our fabulous beekeepers over there. And so Beth's also asking, sort of tuning in on that, just wondering, when you do start with your brood box, do you put all the empty brood frames in, or do you wait as they build and add them one at a time?
You definitely need to put all your brood frames in. If you leave a big gap with no frame, they will build some random comb in there. Not the end of the world, but it's annoying to clean up. What you'll need to do is chop out the sections of brood if they've got brood in there, and rubber band them into your frames. So always put all your frames in, fill up the box with frames. When you don't have a spare frame and you leave one out, you regret it later, because you typically forget, come back and they've built some random comb in there, and you have to fix that up. If it's just honey, you can cut it out and enjoy that and put the other frames in, but if it's brood, you will need to cut around it, rubber band them into the wooden frames, and then they can join it to the surrounding wooden frame, and away they'll go from there.
And Cedric, do you recommend, if you get a nuke, do you recommend feeding them, and for how long?
So that really depends. Around here we don't do a whole lot of feeding bees, almost never, apart from experimental reasons. So places that have long cold winters though, and beekeepers are getting a jump on the season, they will often feed them to pick up the bee numbers prior to the flowers flowering. So if you've got not much forage around, but you're wanting to give your little colony a helping hand and get going in a time when there's not many flowers, by all means feed them. And there's two kinds of syrup feeds you might use. One is a thick syrup where you're 2 parts sugar, 1 part water. You cook that up, let it cool, and then put it into whatever feeder you like. And that thick syrup will be made to store in the frames in order to give them some food for say a cold winter ahead. The thin syrup, which is 1:1, so you're 1 part water, 1 part sugar, that is made to stimulate the bees to lay more eggs. So the queen will be laying more eggs if there is a nectar flow, and you're simulating that nectar flow with that sugar syrup, if it's a thin one, to represent nectar. And beekeepers will do that in the early spring, really to get the numbers up prior to a big honey flow. That way the bees are ready to go and get it and bring all of that nectar back into their hive. You can make a few types of feeders. One easy one is a Ziploc bag. You put your sugar syrup in, you zip it up, got a couple of pinholes in it, put it under the lid, take the plug out of the inner cover, put your gabled roof on top, the bees will come up and suck the sugar syrup out of those pinholes. Super quick and easy, that one.
Great. So if you start your hive in one spot, can you then move it later on? And if so, how would you do that?
So moving a hive, that, like anything in beekeeping, there's long answers. Moving it a short distance, let's say just several meters, you could just move it 1 meter or 2 a day across your yard and just slowly move it to the new position. If you're moving it further, then, but it's within, say, a 4 mile, 6 kilometre kind of radius. So let's say you're moving it several hundred meters, or you're moving it, say, 1 mile. The bees will recognise the surrounding area. They're GPS located exactly to where their hive is, which is incredible in itself. So what you'll need to do is either move them outside of that where they can't remember anymore. So you might move them, say, further than 4 miles or 6 kilometres, leave it there for a month till all the bees have forgotten, because they might only live for 4 to 6 weeks, those foragers. Then move the hive back to the new location where you want it to be. However, that's doubling up on your moves. So what I tend to do is a disorientation technique. Sorry, we'll call it branchy foliage like you see out on the trees here. You snap off a few branches and you put that right in front of the entrance. So you pick up your hive, you move it across your yard, say, and you put some heavy foliage right in front of the entrance, or you can get an old shirt and tape it over the entrance, leaving room for the bees to get out still. But what will happen is the bees will be super enthusiastic. They'll go racing out of the hive, ready to start their day foraging, and they'll bang into this obstacle. And they go, hang on, something's changed. Like a tree fallen in the forest or whatever the mechanism is. And then they will likely do a reorientation flight where they're taking in their landmarks again and reorientating to the new spot. And that works for 95% of your bees. You still end up with 5% returning to the old spot though. In which case you can just let them find their merry way into a hive if there's more hives around, or you could put a cardboard box there or any kind of box, collect the remaining straggler bees and ferry them across to the new location. You might need to do that several times over a week, and then they've got it. They're in the new location without having to do that long move away, wait a month, and then a long move back again.
Great. Musselwhite's asking, what about a hot Texas summer when it's 115? Can they survive in the heat?
Yes, they can. Bees are so resilient and they're amazing little air conditioners. They will collect water, they'll take it back to the hive, they'll use evaporative cooling to actually cool the temperature of the hive down, because they need to keep the brood nest just about our body temperature or just below in order for the brood to survive. So what you'll find is they'll do a great job of air conditioning, and as long as they have adequate ventilation, if you're really worried, you can take the tray out of the bottom and allow maximum ventilation for your hive, and that way your bees will survive in that really hot weather. It's amazing where bees can survive in the hot deserts, to the hot tropics, to the cold snowy regions, to the temperate climates like this one, and they're just incredibly adaptable.
Fantastic. Well, that rain is coming in now.
Yeah, the rain is coming in.
And what's the best way to attract bees into your garden? Is it get a flow hive?
So yes, planting forage like we do is a great way to get all of those native bee species coming, and having a beehive is a great way to get bees into your garden to do your pollination. People very often are writing in saying it's amazing, my garden is so much more productive since I got a beehive. So it certainly does help with pollination.
Great. So Jennifer's got some big black ants. A, what could they do, but also will they harm the bees?
So ants aren't a problem for your bees. They'll keep them out of the hive. It's more of a cosmetic thing for us. They're just a bit annoying. You take off the covers, all these ants go everywhere. They're getting in your honey jar when you're harvesting. Not the end of the world. They'll float to the top. It's more of a cosmetic thing. It's nice to brush them away. So there's a few techniques. You can create an ant barrier using our ant guards and some oil or grease in those. Or you can use a water barrier by putting the feet of your hive, or if you've got a classic hive, you might put some blocks in containers with water, and the ants will find it hard to get over. Of course, you'll need to cut away any foliage that's touching the hive, so the ants will just use that as a bridge, and that will stop them getting onto the hive. But you will need to take off all the covers, take off the roof as you say, brush those ants away. Don't forget the key access cover, brush the ants away. You probably need to brush them away a couple of times, even using an ant barrier, to get all of the pesky little ants away. Then you'll forget about it for a while until next time. You know, often in the wet weather the ants are looking for drier homes. They come up out of the ground, start making nests behind your windows and things like that. Another tip is, if you don't want to create an ant barrier using our ant guards or a water barrier, you can just throw some cinnamon powder behind the covers, and if you brush them away, throw some cinnamon powder behind there a couple of times, that'll deter them as well. However, it does make a little sort of a dusty kind of look on your frames, which you'll have to wipe off later.
Cherie's beekeeper said that they would put the bees into the brood box for them, and so Cherie's question is that then how do they transport the brood box with the bees in them?
Okay, so transporting a hive is best done in the early morning or the cooler part of the day. So once you've got bees established in a hive, then the best thing to do is get up early, just before light, and if there's a lot of bees hanging around because they're a busy hive, blow a little bit of smoke, just not in the entrance but around as the bees are crawling on the front, and you'll do that a few times and all the bees will run in. Seize the moment to close the entrance, or you can get some steel wool and block the entrance, give them plenty of ventilation, take off the gabled roof, strap a hive all the way around it, make sure it's all secure. Then in the light of the day, which is a nicer time, you can then put that onto the back of a pickup or a trailer and take that to your new location. When you get there, put it in the place you want them. You're in your bee suit now, unblock the entrance, and away they'll go reorientating to that new place. So that's how you can move a hive. You may have been asking about a nucleus, which is a starter little hive. When you pick up that from a beekeeper, they've typically got a little dial on the front that will close the entrance, and if the lid's nice and closed, you can then put that in the back of your pickup or on your trailer. Some people do transport them in their car. Now you are taking a risk if you have an accident, you've got bees everywhere, not good. So for that reason we recommend they are not inside the car with you.
Great, thanks Heather. Oh, this is a good one because Heather's just tuning in from the US and saying, yay, the flow frames arrived today with plenty of time. So she'd got one of those split orders. So thanks Heather for that, that's fantastic. But she's wondering, just wanting to check that the flow frames are, you know, correctly set. And do we have videos on that? And in what position should the flow frames be in when you put them into your flow hive?
Okay, so the cells can move up and down like this to form channels, then back again. So you want them in the cell formed position, which is all of the parts down. So to do that, and we'll send you a little down. Now, they can move in transit, so it's an important thing to do before you install them in your hive and let the bees start waxing them up. You want all of the parts forming hexagons.
Great, yeah, and there's lots of videos on the website about that as well you can have a little look at. This is a question from Japan, wondering, can you raise Japanese bees in the flow hive?
You can. There is a Asian honeybee which is in Japan, and there has been experiments to use that native Japanese bee with flow frames. Now, what you need to do is change the size of the flow frames, and they are modular, so you'll be taking off the top wire and reducing the size so they fit in what are quite a smaller hive. They are a smaller bee and they do like a smaller hive, but you can get them working the flow frames, and it has been done successfully.
Great. So you mentioned that the bees that go in the flow hive are the European bees. Are the Italian bees European bees, or what are European bees?
Apis mellifera is the European honeybee that humans have taken all around the world, wherever they go. So they're native to Europe, and now they're in every continent because they're such incredible pollinators, and they make an amazing amount of honey, and they're now a really important part of our food chain. So 99% of bees you see being talked about or being kept are Apis mellifera, like Apis cerana, for instance, and that will be slightly smaller, the stripes are more pronounced, and they don't make nearly as much honey, but they're still really cool bees to keep. So the European honeybee is what we have here, is what you have in America, is what you have everywhere in terms of people keeping bees for honey collection and pollination.
Great. Sita, you mentioned before about removing, I think someone's question was about the queen excluder, taking it off so the bees could access the honey in the super. Nicole's tuned in now and saying, but if you do that, will the queen start reproducing in the super, in the flow frames? And is that a problem?
So in those winter months, if you have a long cold winter, you've taken out the excluder. It's cold enough that the bees are in hibernation mode and the queen has stopped laying any eggs. So it won't be an issue through that time. However, come springtime, it could become an issue if you don't put that excluder back in place. So the process of putting the excluder back in place will be shifting all of the bees down the bottom. So you'll open up your hive, you'll shake all the bees down to the bottom box, and that way you know that the queen is with the bees and they're all down the bottom, and you put your excluder back in place, and that way you know the queen's in the right spot in the hive. You could also go looking for the queen and just put her...
How far apart do hives need to be if you've got more than one hive?
So you can put them wall to wall. I recommend far enough apart so you can stand between them and look in the observation windows and so on, but they can be right up against each other. Having said that, if you put them more than 10 metres apart, you're less likely to get any drift of bees from one hive to the next. What happens if you have them in a row like we've got them is you get a windy day, bees come flying back loaded with almost their body weight in nectar and pollen, and the wind might blow them several hives down and they go, this will do, I'm landing. And as long as they've got nectar and pollen, they'll be welcomed in to that hive. If they come with nothing, there'll be a fight at the door. So that way, that's called drift, where bees will drift down. And if you've got a prevailing wind in an apiary, the hives downwind will get more honey than the hives upwind. So in doing so, they're also sharing pathogens from one hive to the next. So if you want to quarantine one hive from the other, put them more than 10 metres apart. If you're not worried about that, then you can put them as close together as you like.
Sita, John's wondering, is it normal to see drones around the entrance, maybe at certain times of the day? John noticed several going in and out during a time when many bees were active and acting frustrated, buzzing.
So yeah, certain times of year you get a lot of drones. So the drones are there for their reproductive use primarily. We're still finding out more about what else drones might do in a colony, but primarily their function is to take off, fly to a drone congregation area, and hopefully mate with a queen one day. And in doing so, they're spreading the DNA around. So that's their function. Now, in the springtime, you'll see the most drones, where there's a lot of drones at the entrance, a lot of drones flying in and out every day. But other times of year, you can get into situations where there's lots of drones too. If you're seeing a change where there's more drones than foragers, then you might have an issue where your queen is failing or not present, and perhaps the workers are laying unfertilized eggs because they can't lay fertilized ones, and in which case they turn out to be males or drones. So if you don't have a queen, your hive will likely slowly turn into a whole pile of drones that don't collect nectar, that don't collect pollen, that don't do the dishes, and you've just got a whole pile of males and a really bad share house until it dies out.
Thanks, Sita. This could be a really good question to end up on. A beginner beekeeper asking, wanting to get started, but we've obviously got quite a few hives on our website, and it's hard to know which one. Are some better for beginners? Is there a better timber? Is there just suggestions, I guess, for beginners who really don't know that much about which hive to purchase?
Yes. So we do have a range of options there, and the reason why we have a range of options is because it adds some price points that might be better for you. Now, with our Fly Hive 2 Plus, got all the bells and whistles. We've got the pest management tray, we've got little levels in the side, we've got a nice cast aluminium brass D that go for that because it's got all of our features. However, if you want to start with our classic, the flow frames are just the same. You'll still be able to harvest honey from it. You'll just have to be a bit more inventive when it comes to catching hive beetles and things like that, because you won't have a pest management tray, and you'll have to level the surface to put your hive on, and it also doesn't have as many observation windows. So it's up to you. They both will work, they both will get you honey. It's just more on a price point, I guess.
Yeah, fantastic. And maybe just adding to that, Cedar, the other equipment that you would recommend beginners getting as well.
So when you start out in beekeeping, there's a few things you'll need. You'll need a good bee suit, so we offer a range of those. You can get the organic cotton suit, or you can get the mesh one. If you're in a hot climate, the mesh is fantastic because the wind blows straight through it and you don't get so hot out there in the sun doing your beekeeping. My favourite is the mesh jacket because it's just easy to throw on in an instant, and I wear pants most of the time. So, but if you like to wear shorts or skirts, then you might like the full length bee suit for when you want a bee suit. It's also handy to have a veil, which is just a hat and veil for when you're just doing light duty beekeeping stuff. You'll need your smoker as well, your hive tool, and that's the minimum requirements. Your bee protection, along with your gloves. It comes with the gloves and the hive tool, and your smoker. So we have bundles. If you want to get started in beekeeping, we'll make it easy for you. You can get a bundle. It's got everything you need. You'll just need to go and get your bees locally, install them into your hive, watch a bunch of our training videos, do some learning from perhaps those around you, and away you go.
Great, Sid. I might just add to that, because the bee suits now, actually you have to get the hive tool separately, which is kind of like such a great tool. So just you could just get one of those separately from our website as well once you've bought your suits.
Ah yes, okay, great. We have updated our hive tool, and it's now better than before, so have a look at that as well. So bee suit, smoker, hive tool, away you go. Or you can get our caddy, which is a little toolbox with a whole lot of things in it, which will get you started and keep all your things in one spot as well.
Cool. And now Kristen's just asking, can the flow hive be used for stingless bees?
No. So stingless bees, you're referring to our Australian native sugar bag bees. They're still harvested here by the indigenous people, and we have the oldest living culture of honey harvesters in the world here, where they will perhaps tie a little bit of feather, a little bit of hair to a little stingless bee, Tetragonula carbonaria. They're a little tiny black fly-like bee, and then they'll follow it back to their nest, which will usually be in a tree hollow somewhere. They'll rip that apart, take out some of the honey, often destroying the colony, not always, and then they will enjoy that honey. Now, they don't make a whole lot of honey. Perhaps you could harvest half a kilo or a kilogram of honey from one of those native beehives a year. So it doesn't warrant making a fandangled invention to suit their spiral grape-like pollet kind of structure that they build inside. It'd be a very different mechanism, but nonetheless you can keep them, and they're great to have around, and you can harvest a little bit of honey from them each year by manually getting there and pulling some of that comb out.
Fantastic, Cedar. And what about with the pollinator house that we sell? Does that give you honey?
It doesn't give you any honey, no. It's more like a hotel for species that require either a little bamboo tube, or they just require a small space to lay a few eggs, raise their young. So around here we have even seen the blue-banded bee using those, even though they normally go for mud. Sometimes they use the pollinator hotel as well. We also have the leaf cutter bees. If you've ever seen these kind of little cookie cutter marks out of the sides of leaves and wondered what they are, it's a leaf cutter bee, and they chew out a little semicircle of leaf. They'll fly with that back to the pollinator house, they'll roll it up, pack it in there, create a cozy little home to lay a few eggs and raise a couple of young. They don't form colonies, you won't be getting any honey from those. They're simply a beautiful little education piece and also providing some extra habitat for those native bee species that we really do need to look after. And sometimes giving them a bit of support, leaving areas of your yard unkept, giving them little pollinator hotels will be the difference in those species being able to once more spread out across the urban landscape and hopefully join our wild spaces together again. And it's really an important thing.
Fantastic. Mike's saying, not sure where Mike is, but due to winter, so somewhere nice and cold, has removed their flow frames. So his question is, how do I clean it if I...
Taking the flow frames off the box, you've got a cold winter ahead perhaps. If you've harvested all of the honey and let the bees lick up the remaining drops and they're dry, you can just store them in a tub, put them away, keep them away from vermin and wax moth. If they've still got honey in them, you could put them in a freezer and that would keep the honey good for the next time you want to put those flow frames back onto the hive. Or if you've taken them off and kind of forgotten about them and they've gotten a little bit fermented honey on them, then you might like to give them a pressure wash with a pressure cleanup by blasting some of the old wax and honey away. Let them dry and then you can put them back on the hive again by setting them back in the correct position and away they'll go. So people after about 5 years, or we just had a customer write in after 9 years of use. He was a very happy customer with his flow frames and he had got his pressure washer and cleaned them all up again so they were sparkling, as he called it, and then away he goes again. So we've made the flow frames to last as long as possible and we really love to hear those stories of people now 9 years in still having great experience with the flow frames they purchased in 2015.
Fantastic. And VP's asking, do you have to smoke the bees?
So smoking the bees has a calming effect. Now there is a mechanism that we don't completely understand. Some people believe that the smoke changes the mode of the bee into more a fire preservation mode where they're going, uh-oh, fire coming, time to eat some honey in preparation to take off and form a new colony somewhere else. And in doing so, they change modes from being in a protective, guarding the gold mode to actually into a preparation mode. Others believe that the smoke masks the alarm pheromone of the bees, so they're not able to raise the alarm and signal the attack of the mammal coming to rip their hive apart. So whatever the mechanism is, it certainly does have a calming effect. And while you can sometimes do your beekeeping without the smoker, generally we're always having the smoke at the ready and using some smoke to calm the bees, and it's a more gentle experience for you and the bees to do the brood inspection.
Fantastic, Seeds. And of course then the other one now, we've got a lot of customers receiving their hives and there's a few questions coming in about how to protect them, whether you've got the Western Red Cedar, the 2+, or the classic, or the Flow Hive 2, which is the hoop pine. What do you recommend putting on the hives?
So if you have the Araucaria or hoop pine, then we do recommend a good outdoor house paint. That's what beekeepers put on hives forever. You can paint them inside and out, or you could just do the outside. Now, it's up to you on that one. We usually keep the inside just natural wood for the bees, but you'll be putting a coat on and that'll make that wood last the longest. If you've got the Western Red Cedar, it has natural antifungal properties in it, and you'll find you can use a decking coat, which is made for putting on a veranda on your decking boards in order to keep it looking like wood for the longest time. So those products you can buy at your hardware store, we usually use the water-based decking products, and that gives us our longest lasting finish and gives you a couple of years before you need to touch up that coat again. You can use wood oils, but we've found 6 months or a year down the track it's not looking so good. The oils tend to attract mildew. Not a problem for the wood, but it just doesn't look so good anymore. So for that reason we recommend the deck coats on the cedar wood. Or with the cedar wood you can leave it just natural and let it slowly go grey over time, and that's another thing you can do with that wood. But if you've got the Araucaria, we definitely recommend a good outdoor house paint. And on your rooftop, it's the most hard-hitting area with the sun and the rain and the elements. So what you'll need to do is paint that regardless of whether it's Araucaria or Western red cedar. Give it a good quality coat, seal up all the gaps, and even paint the undersides of the shingles, and that will limit on the top and so on.
Fantastic, Cedar. And in saying that, with the roof, do you recommend painting the inner cover which sits in under the roof?
Not a bad idea. We generally don't, but painting the inner cover will make it last longer, and you can put a few good coats on that, and that will limit it swelling in wet weather and so on.
Great. Here's the one from Insta. Where's the best location to put your flow hive? And it's the one we get quite a lot, like, is it shade or sun, sunrise or sunset, best view? I don't know.
So as a backyard beekeeper, we have slightly different requirements to commercial beekeepers. Commercial beekeepers are usually plonk them out in a paddock somewhere with the entrance facing towards the morning sun, or facing towards a direction that gets a bit of morning sun in the entrance to get them up working an hour earlier in the day, and therefore collecting more nectar, storing more honey. For us, there's other things that might be more important than getting that 5 or 10% more honey production. And one of the big ones is the flight path of the bees. You want to put them in an area where the bees can fly in and out without bothering anybody. So avoid pointing them towards a pathway where people are walking past, or you might find somebody will get a bee in their hair and a sting on the head. Not a great experience for your visitor. So you'll be looking for a spot in your backyard where you can just let the bees fly out the front, ideally for a couple of meters, then up and away without bothering anybody. That's probably the main criteria, and then will come sun or shade. So if you have a choice between full sun and full shade, I would go full sun. But if you've got a position where you've got shade in the afternoon in summer, then that's even better again. But full sun is fine for bees. Full shade can be okay, but can be problematic if you get damp issues and you've got a pathogen called chalk brood around. It could take hold in a wet, damp location, more so than if the hive was in the sun.
Great, thanks, Cedar. In terms of into your flow hive,
so plants close to flow hives, well, it doesn't attract the ants, but what it can do is be a bridge for the ants. So if you're having trouble with ants and they're just being annoying, then what you can do is cut the foliage away so there's no foliage touching the hive, because ants will tend to walk up that as a bridge and bypass your little ant guards down the bottom. So there are some flowering species that the nectar gets harvested by ants, but generally not. It's more so harvested by bees.
Great, Cedar. Yeah, great answer. And of course with the ant guards as well, if you've got the 2 and the 2+, which is great for putting, what would you recommend putting in there, Cedar, the oil or water?
So I would go oil. It'll last longer than water. Water will evaporate quite quickly, so you'll be topping it up every day, whereas oil will last longer, or a grease will last even longer, like a Vaseline you could put in there, and that'll stay in there the longest. Okay, we've got time for a few more questions, and the rain has stopped for the most part. We might wander back and have a look at how our honey jar is going. So this is our lunch table here. We've got our wicking beds, we've got our lettuces that we've just replanted. Trace has been doing a great job. We've got our rocket, and we've got a lot of gardens around the back too, and a lot of herbs we use, and we cook up a storm here at Flow HQ, and it's wonderful to be eating out of the garden. Our cucumbers are going off as usual. Unbelievable. They've even just found a new cucumber vine, just self-seeded with cucumbers all over it. So it's great to see the garden going off, and it's often reported that when you have beehives, things that need pollination really do set fruit more. So keeping bees is a wonderful thing for more than one reason.
Totally, I reckon. The garden is just going gangbusters. It's such a good time up here at the moment. We're getting plenty of rain, as you can see. Callum's probably shooting. You can see out there towards the ocean, it's so grey and cloudy.
Look at that, we've got this daisy's flowering like crazy. The bees have been foraging on that, and it's really looking pretty, even though it's a bit of an invasive species around here. Look at this, we have a nice full jar of honey. Yum yum.
Oh,
perfect.
Wow.
It's such a rewarding thing just to turn the handle and see the jar fill up. Even still, 9 years in, I really almost do get a bit of a surprise to see it. There it is. There's no more processing that needs to be done. It's ready for the table. There's not even a skerrick of anything in there. It's just the honey's come out. So that was a real win. At first we thought, oh, it's going to be full of wax and bits and pieces, just because that's the way conventionally it ends up, and then you have to go through this sieving process, and we thought we have to build in sieves and things into here. We didn't need it. The honey just comes out. You know, at most you might get a couple of little flecks of wax or something floating to the top, but generally not. It's ready to go. A couple more questions.
Yeah, what's Louise is in southeast Queensland and using okay, question is, brood frames without foundation, is it likely bees will build the frames at this time of the year?
Yes, if they do have some nectar available and you might get a late flow, they will build their wax. So they use the nectar as their carbohydrate source, or their honey. They'll excrete wax from their wax glands, mince it up with their mandibles, and do their amazing architecture of building comb in the bottom box here. Or, as you can see, the wax building up on these flow frames. They will use it to connect all the flow frame parts together and complete the cells and draw the wax out further. So it depends. Ask your local beekeepers how much nectar is available, or tune in if you're online and help answer the questions. Wonderful to see people just tuning in and helping each other from all around the world. I'm going to show you how to finish harvesting now. So all we did at the start of the video is we turned that handle, we walked away, we covered the jar up, we came back, we got a nice full jar of honey. Now it was in the bottom slot there, and it was turned like this, right? So all I'm going to do is go back to a 90, take it out, move it up to the top position, all the way to the back like this. Now I turn it, and now all the parts form together again into hexagons. A little tip, leave that there for 30 seconds or a minute or two if you can, and that way all of the parts will be pushed back down nicely into position. Sometimes if there's a lot of wax build up, they might kind of, if you do a quick close, they might bounce back up a bit and you don't have properly formed cells for the bees to use. So a little tip there. Now we've got our cap here that goes in the bottom. We just simply pull that out and put that in, and you've got a very neat harvest there. We haven't spilt a drop of honey. There's no mess, no fuss like the old method. This is the only thing to clean up, this one thing, which is a joy really, because I can just eat the honey in there. Or you can leave it there with that little tag on the edge of the jar for a little while, and the remaining honey will go back into the jar. So don't leave it here in the lid because it's been raining. Harvesting honey in the rain is something you can do with a flow hive. You certainly wouldn't be doing that with a conventional hive. I'm actually going to take that lid off, empty out the water, because you don't want to add water to your honey, because if the moisture content's too high, it will ferment, and that's the reason why we wait till the bees have capped it, till they've dewatered the honey, and that way if there are colony forming units in there, being yeasts, they don't have enough of a watery solution to get going in. If you put a lid on that and stop moisture coming out of the air, then if the honey's nice and ready, it was capped, the moisture content's down around that 18% range, what you find is it'll last for seemingly ever. Egyptian tombs have dug up honey that's been 3,000 years old, and although it's candied, which is the normal process, it's still good. So keep a lid on your jar and enjoy the honey. It's just such an incredible thing.
Well, this is just before you go, Seeds might ask you, Sally's wondering, and we love it when our beekeepers come in with things like this, is it possible to do more brood inspections and some up and coming Q&As on the lives?
Absolutely. Let us know what you'd like us to cover and we'll get into it. We'll be pulling apart a hive. Let's do that next week, weather permitting, and we'll have a look right down in the brood nest. We'll go through what brood looks like, what honey looks like, what pollen looks like, and you never know, we might even find the queen for you as well. So tune in, same time next week, and we'll have something interesting to show you. Thanks for all of your amazing questions, and also a big thank you to all of those tuning in and helping answer all of the questions coming in. Same time next week, and look at that, we've got a beautiful jar of honey from one of these frames. We can now turn that key back to a 90, take it out and close up the little cap at the top, and that's basically it. Our harvesting process is done. We can put this back on, not forgetting the little key access cover at the top, and job done. Also remember to put your windows back in, because if you leave that off, what you'll find is the sun can shine in and put, especially if you're in a hot time, put too much heat into your top box. So put your window covers back, and that's it.